It started as an ordinary school day, but things took a shocking turn when a teacher crossed a line no one expected. In a packed classroom, a black girl named Maya found herself singled out and humiliated by her teacher, Mrs. Jenkins, in front of her peers. What started as a simple question turned into a harsh critique, laced with prejudice, leaving Maya feeling small and powerless. But what Mrs. Jenkins didn't know was that Maya's mother was someone she should never underestimate, a woman whose strength and influence could shake the entire school system. As whispers spread and tension filled the air, the question lingered. What happens when someone messes with the wrong family? This is a story about justice, courage, and standing up to ignorance. Stick around to see how one brave mother turns the tables in a way no one saw coming. Maya sat quietly at her desk, her cheeks burning as the laughter of her classmates echoed in her ears. Mrs. Jenkins, a teacher known for her sharp tongue, had made yet another comment about Maya's attitude during a class discussion. But this time it felt different. The words cut deeper, loaded with an undertone that Maya couldn't ignore. She looked down at her notebook, trying to fight back tears, while Mrs. Jenkins carried on as if nothing had happened. What the class didn't know was that Maya's mother, Serena, wasn't someone to back down from a fight, especially when it came to protecting her daughter. A single mother and a successful lawyer, Serena had faced her share of challenges and learned to navigate them with grace and determination. As the school day ended, Maya packed her bags slowly, unsure whether she should tell her mom. Little did she know, the wheels of justice were already turning. That evening, as Maya sat at the kitchen table, her silence spoke louder than words. Serena noticed immediately. "What's wrong, baby?" she asked, setting down her briefcase. Maya hesitated, unsure how to explain the humiliation she felt earlier that day. "It's nothing, Mom. Just school stuff," she mumbled. But Serena wasn't convinced. She leaned closer, her eyes filled with concern. "You know you can tell me anything, right?" Eventually, the words spilled out. Maya recounted every detail, the dismissive tone, the mocking words, and the way Mrs. Jenkins seemed to target her. As Serena listened, her expression shifted from concern to quiet resolve. She asked a few pointed questions, her mind already piecing together the bigger picture. Meanwhile, at school, rumors about the incident had started to spread. Some students defended Mrs. Jenkins, claiming she was just strict. Others whispered that this wasn't the first time she'd crossed the line. The tension was building, and Serena was ready to act. The next morning, Serena walked Maya to school, her usual warmth replaced by a quiet determination. "Just focus on your classes," she said firmly, "and let me handle this." Maya nodded, feeling a mix of nervousness and relief. She wasn't sure what her mom had planned, but she trusted her completely. As Serena entered the school office, her presence was impossible to ignore. Calm but commanding, she requested a meeting with the principal, Mr. Carter, and Mrs. Jenkins. Word of her arrival spread quickly among the staff, and Mrs. Jenkins, hearing her name, felt a flicker of unease. She hadn't expected anyone to push back, let alone Maya's mother. In the meantime, students whispered about the brewing confrontation. Some recalled moments when Mrs. Jenkins had been unfair to others, while a few defended her as just being old school. By lunchtime, the air in the hallways was electric with anticipation. Everyone wondered, what was Maya's mom going to do? And how far would she go to make things right? As the meeting began, Serena sat across from Mrs. Jenkins and Principal Carter, her calm demeanor masking the storm brewing inside. "I'm here to discuss the treatment of my daughter," she began, her voice steady but firm. Mrs. Jenkins shifted uncomfortably, brushing it off with a nervous laugh. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," she said quickly, but Serena wasn't buying it. She pulled out a folder, sliding it across the table. "This isn't the first time my daughter, or other students, have experienced your so-called teaching methods. These are statements from parents and students who've had similar issues with you." The room went silent. Principal Carter's expression darkened as he opened the folder, reading through the pages. Mrs. Jenkins' confidence faltered, but she tried to regain control. "This is an exaggeration," she stammered. "You're blowing things out of proportion." Before Serena could respond, there was a knock at the door. To everyone's surprise, another parent entered, Mr. Reynolds, whose son had also been in Mrs. Jenkins' class. "I think you want to hear what I have to say," he announced. Suddenly, the conflict was no longer just about Maya. It was much bigger, and Serena realized she wasn't alone in this fight. As Mr. Reynolds took his seat, he revealed that his son had also faced discriminatory remarks from Mrs. Jenkins. Principal Carter, visibly disturbed, turned to Mrs. Jenkins. "This is serious," he said. "We need to address these allegations immediately." Mrs. Jenkins, now pale, struggled to find her words. I never intended," she began, but her voice trailed off. Serena, seizing the moment, proposed a comprehensive review of Mrs. Jenkins' conduct and the implementation of diversity training for all staff. Principal Carter agreed, stating that an investigation would commence immediately. Mrs. Jenkins, realizing the gravity of the situation, nodded silently, acknowledging the need for change. As the meeting concluded, Serena felt a sense of accomplishment. However, as she and Mr. Reynolds exited the office, they overheard a conversation between two teachers discussing a recent policy change. It seemed that the school board had just appointed a new superintendent, Serena's estranged sister, whom she hadn't spoken to in years. This unexpected twist left Serena contemplating the complexities of family and the challenges that lay ahead in her fight for justice. As Serena walked Maya home that afternoon, she held her daughter's hand tightly, feeling a mix of pride and determination. The school's promise to investigate and implement changes was a step forward, but Serena knew the real work had just begun. She wanted to ensure Maya, and every other child, would never face such treatment again. At dinner that night, Maya finally smiled. "You were amazing, Mom," she said softly. Serena laughed. "And don't you ever forget that you were amazing too," she replied. The next week, the school announced mandatory diversity training for all staff, and Mrs. Jenkins was placed on administrative leave. Serena received an unexpected call from the new superintendent, her sister. Though their past was complicated, they agreed to meet, setting the stage for a reunion filled with hope and understanding. As Maya headed off to school the next day, she carried a newfound confidence, knowing her voice and her mother had made a difference.